As a new mother, cradling her babe, 4 words sickened me more than anything I'd ever heard. How much for Milo? The 1726 train from Manchester to Accrington is typically brimming with commuters. On this evening, however, it was oddly empty. It wasn't a particularly late train, of course, but the sun sets early on wintry nights. It could have been midday, for all I cared, but my pounding chest wouldn't have levelled. The world outside was a black canvas, smudged only by the sweaty print of my cheek on the window. A print left when the man to question startled my half-conscious body upright. I massaged my frozen face and twisted to eye the figure sitting across the aisle. I beg your pardon? I responded. How much for Milo? The man repeated. He wore a black trench coat that encased his body from his chin to his toes. His face, the only visible part of his form, was entirely unremarkable. Brown hair and brown eyes. There was nothing specifically frightening about him, yet everything about him frightened me. The stranger was the only other soul in my section of the train, and that realization was paralyzing. Every woman dreads such an encounter. Still, this was not, unfortunately, my first interaction with an unnerving man, and I doubt it shall be my last. I fought hard to swallow the monstrous lump in my throat before making an effort to deliver my words confidently. How do you know the name of my child? I calmly asked. The man replied by nodding at my boy's blue fluffy beanie. It had his name stitched across the front, a handmade present from my mother. The explanation seemed rational, so my heart slowed a little, but the man's lingering gaze and question both filled the carriage with an overwhelming sense of impending doom. Please leave me alone, I said, setting a firm boundary. I gazed down at the boy. Milo was wriggling around with a contented look on his face. I remember thinking only that I was ready to die for my child. I envisioned myself soaring towards the man's throat, then tearing away a meaty chunk with my teeth. I was not going to let any harm come to my baby. I would do anything to protect him. How much would it take? The man gently inquired. I am happy to offer something other than money. I have pepper spray in my pocket, I instantly retorted. He smiled, and it was, without a doubt, the most horrific smile I have ever seen. Not even malevolent. It was simply incorrect, inaccurate. The curvature of his grin was lopsided, and his lips twitched almost imperceptibly for the briefest moment before being corrected. But I noticed the hiccup. It looked as if the man had never smiled before, as if he was simply attempting what he had assumed to be a smile. I see this isn't the right time, the stranger conceded, standing up. I clenched, squeezing Milo in my arms. The child uttered a confused yelp, and I loosened my grip. My eyes had not blinked during the entire conversation. I had not dared to close them, even for a millisecond. The next stop is Mill Hill, came a voice over the tannoy. This is me, the man declared. Milo started to wail, as if instinctively recognizing the man's wrongness, and I returned my eyes to the bawling bundle in my lap. It was a primal reflex. Obviously, I immediately panicked, realizing I had averted my gaze from the real and present danger before me. But when I looked back at the aisle, the man had disappeared. I wasn't sure how he fled so quickly. The carriage's doors hadn't even opened. However, I was simply relieved to be alone. Suddenly, the swaying trees and the endless darkness outside the window did not seem quite so terrifying. I chalked the experience up to an overreaction on my part. The man was disturbing, but he was just that, a man. I berated myself for portraying the stranger as some formidable foe. In my anxiety-riddled mind, I always have a tendency to find horror at every turn. And that only became worse when my body was flooded by the stress and hormones of motherhood. Nonetheless, I'm powerful. I told myself that I would not be intimidated. I was not a target. "You okay, hun?" AJ softly asked. "Oh, I remember that look. Saw it in the mirror every day. I don't envy you. The sleepless nights, the crying. Ugh. I'm so glad that Johnny is in high school now. Teenagers are terrors, but at least they don't keep you up all night." Sweet, perfect AJ. A woman with the psychic prowess to dive into the troubled waters of my mind, using only loving words, and pull me to the shore of reality. Of course, at the time, I never admitted such deep feelings to myself. There was no room for sentimentality in my life. AJ was simply my work crush. That was what I told myself. Just a silly crush. Someone to alleviate the crippling boredom of working at an inner-city bank. Someone who'd helped me recover from the heartbreak of Milo's father fleeing the scene. In truth, however, I'd been in love with her for the whole year that we had worked together. I stammered, unable to complete a sentence. "Oh yeah, totally. Great point," AJ said. "I always enjoy our little chats, Lucy." I blushed, plopping into my chair and internally screaming at myself for yet another embarrassing interaction. But what was the point of even trying to make a good impression? She knew I had a baby, and I was sure that she wouldn't be interested. I told myself that I probably gave off heterosexual vibes. "Oh, there I go," I thought. A healthy slice of internalized bigotry. A woman can't possibly be interested in other women if she has a baby. Gah, AJ has a boy too. Do you apply that logic to her? The reason I'm talking about work is that something happened on the morning after my horrible encounter with the man on the train. "Hello," a familiar voice greeted. I froze, refusing to tear my eyes away from the monitor. I immediately recognized the man's voice. It triggered some survival response in my body. But I fought hard to regain control of my limbs. Fought hard to choose fight, not flight. I lifted my head to see the stranger standing before my desk. He was no longer grinning. It was as if he had realized that his charming, placid smile had not been entirely convincing. And I found that I longed for the falseness to return, because his true self was petrifying. "Are you following me?" I asked. "I will call security." "There is absolutely no need for that," the man assured me. "Finley Gaskell. That's my account. Take a look." I wanted to summon security, but I knew that would only result in a scene. In turn, my entire day would be derailed. I didn't want the headache. It would be easier to simply shoo the creep away on my own, I told myself. I was being pig-headed. I simply wanted to prove my strength and independence. When I pulled up the man's account on the screen, my eyes strained disbelievingly. He had £50 million. I hadn't seen an account with even a tenth of that monetary sum before. £10 million, the man said. Is that the amount you'd like to withdraw? I asked. He sighed deeply. That is the amount I would like to offer for Milo. Or, as I told you yesterday, I am happy to offer things other than money. There was that gruesome grin. The man's human costume seemed to deteriorate with each attempt at pleasantry. I reached for the security button, but I found, to my horror, that it wasn't there. I ducked my head beneath the desk and frantically reached around with a searching hand. Nothing. No need for that, the man assured me. I lifted my head and prepared to unleash a thunderous stream of expletives at my stalker. What stopped me was the silence, the stillness. Every other person in the bank had simultaneously ceased talking, and as I looked around, I realised none of them were moving either. They were trapped in a form of suspended stasis. Darkness followed. It encompassed all in the room, other than the man and me. Within seconds, we were alone in a void. The desk between us disappeared, and I was standing. I didn't remember standing. My neck hairs rose obediently, and my flesh hardened, becoming too heavy to move. I braced, in utter terror, for what I believed to be my final moments. Then the man leant forwards, his face stopping only an inch in front of mine, and he spoke in a barely audible whisper. Yet the words seemed to erupt at a tremendous volume. "You will not like my next offer," the man warned. I roughly crumpled my eyelids together, but it wasn't enough to prevent a solitary tear from trickling down my cheek. I waited for the blackness to consume me, but the end never came. When I opened my eyes, the world resumed, as if I had flicked a light switch. The darkness lifted, and everybody continued with their day, apparently having not experienced what I experienced. I remained glued to my sweat-drenched chair, and the man, surprisingly, had not vanished into thin air. He was strolling out of the bank, and he'd caught my friend's attention. "Do you need me to fetch David?" AJ asked. "Huh?" I replied, barely present. "Dave, security. Do you want him to run after that guy? He was harassing you." "Oh," I gulped. Thanks, but I'm okay. I just..." "Are you okay?" AJ asked, placing a hand on my shoulder and smiling at me. That's a human smile. That's how a human should look, I remember thinking as I quaked. Not really, but... I don't know him, but he scared me on the train home last night, I explained. I'm sorry for being vacant with you earlier. I was still a little shaken up about it. Sorry, rewind, AJ said. A man harassed you on the way home. Then he found you at your place of work. Lucy, we need to call the police. No, I don't want to do that, I said, shaking my head. I don't want to let him have that power over me. Power over you? AJ exasperatedly replied. Lucy, the creep knows where you work. He might know where you live, too. What's your address? Huh? I responded, dumbfounded. I know my shift ends a little after yours, but I'm not leaving you on your own tonight, AJ insisted. Fair warning though, I will spend the whole night convincing you to ring the police. Look, that's very sweet of you, but you don't need to do that, I said. Either I come over, or I call the police right now. Which is it? AJ asked. I smiled. I do appreciate that you're, looking after me, but the police won't take a report on someone else's behalf, so... Do you want me to be a nuisance? I'll be a nuisance, AJ promised. Come over, I sighed. Aw, Lucy, thank you. You really know how to make a girl feel wanted. AJ chuckled, playfully pinching my cheek. Please tell me you've at least renovated the kitchen since your last party. You know what I earn, AJ. What do you think? I replied. AJ laughed, squeezing my shoulder before returning to work. The woman had a way of soothing me, a way of assuring me that all would be okay. In fact, the logical cogs in my brain were already whirring. I was frantically trying to rationalise what I'd experienced. I was so overcome by fear that I imagined all of it, I lied to myself. Yet I still felt a pit of foreboding dread in my gut. After a long shift, I drove to my brother's house. Patrick worked from home, and I couldn't afford childcare at the time, so he babysat Milo whilst I was at the bank. Ordinarily, I'd pick up my child a little before 5, then we'd take the train home. On this afternoon, however, I didn't rush off. I needed to tell Patrick what had happened. Have you called the police? You know Jean has that friend on the force, don't you? She'll be home in a minute, so we'll ask her. She could probably pull some strings, make this guy's life a misery. Finley Gaskell. I'll make a note of that name for her, Patrick said, pacing back and forth. Please don't bring Jean into this, I implored, trying to calm my fuming brother down. I put the man in his place. I don't think he'll be bothering me again. That was another lie. Even if the blackened void had been a trauma-induced hallucination, the stranger had clearly threatened me. I was terrified, but I wasn't going to tell my brother that. As I said, I'm stubborn. Sometimes I confuse recklessness for independence. Why don't you just wait another 10 minutes or so? Jean can drive you and Milo home, Patrick said. To Accrington, I replied. No. I know what you're like, Mr. Hangry. You're an awful cook, so you'd be starving by the time she'd arrive home. Look, I will be fine on the train, Patrick. Calm down. Maybe you should sleep here. Just for a little while. It'd be easier for you to commute to work, Patrick offered. Thank you, but I'm going home, I firmly stated. My brother sighed. You don't have to do everything on your own, Lucy. I know, I said, leaning forwards to give my brother a peck on the cheek. That's why I hired you as my very own nanny. Hired usually implies payment. Patrick laughed as I scooped up Milo. Yeah. I'm almost done with your remortgage application, so you're getting an alright deal out of this, I said, heading towards the door. You said that 3 weekends ago, Patrick replied, rolling his eyes. Well, I get distracted, I shrugged. By that girl, I reckon, Patrick smiled. Whatever. Anyway, don't you enjoy babysitting the little bugger? I said, tickling Milo's feet and gently rocking him from side to side. Oh, it's a blast, Patrick smiled, tickling a squealing Milo. Life's a blast at the moment. Baby puke on my jeans, a stalked sister, crippling mortgage payments. Sorry, I'm just crabby today. See you tomorrow, Krabby Patty, I teased, stepping out of the front door. I stopped halfway down the path and turned to face my brother. I'm really grateful for everything you do, Patrick. You know that, don't you? Yeah, my brother laughed. Don't be all sappy. It's weird. Text me when you get back, okay? On the train home, my spirits were strangely high. And if my story had ended there, I might have dismissed my 2 horrifying encounters as the result of numerous sleepless nights. At this point, Milo was already 14 months old, but parenthood hadn't magically become any easier. I was exhausted. So, I assumed that I'd simply been turning a frightening but rational situation into something supernatural. Something unexplainable. Fortunately, the carriage was packed, and that made me feel safe. That's not usually how I respond to crowds, of course. I was simply glad I hadn't brought the stroller, as there wouldn't have been any room for it. I told myself that the night before had been a freak event. I told myself that the horror in the bank had been a trauma response. Everything made sense. In any case, it had been a strange 24 hours, but I thought that it had come to an end. If the man were to return to the bank, I would finally call security. That was the promise I made to myself. I would make AJ happy and call the police, in fact. I felt confident, believed that I'd considered every possible eventuality. And don't we all feel more powerful within the confines of the mind? In that quiet place, we have control. Reality, of course, had other terrible ideas. The blood drained from my face when I spotted a familiar trench coat by the train doors. It was him, lurking in the crowd. Along with the same overcoat, the man wore that same uneven smile. It had fallen even lower, almost toppling off his chin. The next stop is Mill Hill, the tannoy announced. That's his stop, I hopefully thought. I watched and waited. The man did not depart the train, but many others did. I didn't want to be left alone on a carriage with him. Acting quickly and holding Milo tightly to my chest, I darted towards the doors. Hugging the far side of the departing crowd, in a bid to keep some distance from the stranger, I safely reached the platform. With bated breath, I watched the man and he watched me. He did not follow. Then the doors finally closed and I exhaled. Tears of manic relief stained my face as the train pulled away from the station. My ribs were nearly buckling under the strain of my beating heart, but I managed to control my breathing. Of course, I realised I had a much longer walk ahead of me because I'd exited the train 2 stops early. Just a little stroll, Milo, I promised my boy, in a half-convincing attempt to conceal my terror. It's good to stretch our legs, eh? Well, my legs. You just relax. The roads formed a bleak, icy passage home, but the streets were relatively full. Fellow strollers offered judgmental glances, wondering why a lone woman, cradling a baby in her arms, was walking home in the dark. I didn't blame them. Every ounce of my being wanted to call an Uber or return to the station and wait for a later train, but I stubbornly pressed onwards. I didn't exactly have the spare funds for any additional transport. A 2-hour walk in the cold. I told myself we would be okay. Milo was sheltered beneath my thick coat, and he wore numerous layers. but I wished I'd brought his stroller. Wished I'd stayed on the train. However, with that man's ghastly smile flooding my mind, it had been hard to think clearly. When protecting a baby, parents act in irrational ways. Plenty of parents have made rasher decisions than me. Still, when I reached the unwelcoming, unlit tunnels that pass beneath Accrington, I decided it might be time to head to the main road. An Uber was a luxury I could scarcely afford, but it wasn't worth risking Milo's safety. However, when I searched for nearby drivers, there were none, so I begrudgingly looked at my phone's GPS. Following the underground path, it would only take 10 minutes to get home. It was a shortcut. And the tunnel will be warm, I told myself. It's fine, I'll be quick. I plunged into Accrington's hidden jaws. Flickering mould-coated lights lined the walls, barely puncturing the darkness. Some were broken, most were faded, and none provided sufficient illumination. It was such a long passage that I struggled to see any sort of reassuring light at the tunnel's end. There was nothing but blackness before and behind me. I started to regret my decision and prepared to turn on my heel, but my thoughts were interrupted by a sudden clunk. Echoing from the tunnel's depths. Then, as if they'd finally lost all remaining will, every last light extinguished, and I understood true darkness. Milo started to squirm anxiously inside my coat. "Hush, baby," I tenderly pleaded. "It's okay. Mummy's going back the way she came." Another loud clunk. I considered that, perhaps, all of the lights were about to spring back to life, but only two returned. The farthest two lights, finally revealing the end of the tunnel, revealing what blocked its exit. The stranger. He raised a hand and waved. I did what I should have done long before that. I turned and sprinted back to the tunnel's entrance. Sprinted into nothing, praying that I would not stumble over an unseen hazard in the dark. I securely clutched Milo, but the sudden movement jolted him from his slumber. He began to wail uncontrollably, and it took all of my bravery not to do the same. "How much for Milo?" The whispered query barreled down the chamber of the tunnel, a perturbing projectile that tore through my flesh. When I finally emerged from the entrance, I twisted my head and gasped. The tunnel's lights had returned, but the man was nowhere to be seen. I looked at my GPS, searching for the fastest way to the main road. I hurriedly cut through the surrounding woodland. It was not as safe as following the footpath, but it was quicker. I had to reach civilization. Milo continued to cry inconsolably as I struggled to weave between trees, guiding the way with my phone's meagre torch. "I know, baby," I breathlessly whispered as I sprinted onwards. I know. There came whistling, like some feverish, piercing alarm. It disrupted the forest, as birds suddenly soared from the trees in a frenzied panic. I didn't have that luxury. Then my flashlight momentarily caught a shape. Between two trees, I saw something black and featureless that did not belong. Something with arms that seemed to be rooted in the earth below. It barely had the shape of a man, but I knew it was him. The light captured his dreadful smile for a fleeting moment before he vanished. I felt, much as I did in the bank, the breath of death itself on my pale skin. Neither warm nor cold, simply stale and final. When I finally stumbled past the edge of the tree line, finding myself beside a main road, I thought I'd entered the afterlife. It felt impossibly miraculous. I didn't even consider pausing to call an Uber. My mind wasn't capable of thought, in fact, which is why I launched into the road, flailed my arms, and caused two drivers from opposite directions to slam on their brakes. They were furious, but their anger quickly subsided when I explained my horrifying predicament. One man dialed 999, and he waited with me until the police arrived. The officers escorted Milo and me home, after extensively questioning me about the man. But it was a fruitless endeavour. They would not be able to help me, and I would no longer lie to myself. The thing that wanted my baby was not human.
He asked that?
AJ screeched down the phone.
I don't know what to do,
I cried.
I just finished my shift and I'm in the car now, on my way to yours,
AJ explained.
Don't worry, it's a hands-free call. No, just go home. I'm fine,
I quietly blubbered.
20 minutes away,
AJ said, ignoring my comment. When she arrived, my floodgates fully opened, and I sobbed into her warm shoulder. As I lay on her lap, explaining the events of the night in harrowing detail, AJ lovingly stroked my matted, unkempt hair.
The officer said they take threats of stalking very seriously, and they'll look into it,
I explained.
So they'll do nothing, basically,
AJ sighed.
They never do anything until it's too late, and even then they don't do enough.
I didn't say anything. I simply sank deeper into AJ's lap, cheeks squelching against the tear-soaked patch on her jeans.
Sorry, she said. That wasn't very comforting.
I smiled, sniffled, then sat upright.
Right, I need to start Milo's bedtime routine. After that, do you want some food?
I asked. AJ grinned.
I thought you'd never offer, my gracious host.
An hour later, once I was certain that the baby was asleep, I ordered 2 curries from my favourite takeaway. AJ and I then chatted for hours, barely paying attention to the film we'd chosen. I felt safe.
Even if the stranger rears his heinous head once more, AJ will protect me.
That was what I truly believed.
May I ask something?
My friend suddenly inquired.
Seeing as you asked so politely, sure.
I chuckled.
Lucy, is there a vibe between us?
AJ tentatively asked. I paused. My lips opened and closed, like a ceaseless seesaw, before the sound of wailing interrupted.
Oh, of course,
I sighed, peeling myself away from AJ's awkward question.
I suppose I'd better go and check on him.
As I strolled into the main hallway, the ocean of endorphins in my brain instantly evaporated. Something instinctive woke in my core, pulling me into reality. I sensed danger. This was more than a maternal urge. Milo cried numerous times every day. This was unlike any feeling I'd experienced before. Something was upstairs. I sprinted to the 2nd floor, skipping every other step. I tripped on the final one, banging my knee on the floor, but I quickly scrambled to my feet.
Are you okay, Lucy?
AJ called. I didn't respond. I charged down the dark hallway and burst into Milo's room. He was manically rolling from side to side in his cot, while screeching incessantly. I ran over and lifted him into my arms. I was so fixated on my baby boy that it took a few seconds to notice the source of his distress. There was a silhouette behind the curtains, and it had the shape of a man. I screamed. Then I flew across the room without a moment's hesitation and drew the drapes with my free hand. But there was nothing to be found. No man, no one. I knelt down, cradling Milo and trying to still my tears. After 20 or 30 minutes of consolation, he eventually started to settle, and I returned my beautiful child to the cot to let him resume his peaceful slumber. Bracing myself on the windowsill, I hoisted my weak knees upwards and stood. Then I faced the glass pane again, and this time I truly screamed. In the reflection, the man was standing directly behind me. My unbridled shriek ripped through the night with such ferocity that I thought the window pane might shatter, and that scream was only silenced by the touch of the man. He paralysed my vocal cords, paralysed every part of my body as he tenderly wrapped the cold, hollow fingers of his right hand around my shoulder. With every ounce of willpower, I managed to wrench my body free, and I spun on my heel to face him. Expecting to eye the dreadful stranger, I was initially relieved to find myself staring into darkness. However, after a moment of reflection, I realised that my surroundings had vanished. All that existed in the void was a neat row of 3 cardboard boxes. Sweat trickling down my brow, I stretched a trembling hand towards the first box, and I whimpered as I peeled the lid open. Inside, there was nothing but a plate. A white, red-rimmed plate. Still, I knew it was the third box which should intimidate me. The first 2 were merely there to set the scene. Driven by a little less adrenaline, I opened the second box. The cardboard cage engulfed me. I screeched as I tumbled into eternity. Haunting forms surrounded me in the blackness, the plummeting bodies of my loved ones. Flesh was melting away from their skeletons, and their cries cut into my eardrums. Then, finally, I was holding something in my palms. A beating heart. I looked down to find a bloody cavity in my chest, and I wondered how I was still standing. With a gentle thud, I fell to some manner of ground. I had returned to the row of boxes, and I was eyeing the final one. Mouth agape, I gingerly reached towards it. However, I opened only the lids of my eyes. I was lying on the floor of Milo's room. He was still bawling, and AJ was kneeling beside my collapsed body. She was asking what I needed. Water, the hospital. I lied once more that I was fine, and I explained what I saw before rising to my feet and lifting Milo from his cot. Alo searched the house, but there was no sign of the man. No sign of forced entry. No sign of anything untoward.
I think,
AJ started, embracing me tightly.
I think that trauma and exhaustion have both muddled your thoughts. You need some sleep, babe.
I knew she was wrong, but I didn't contest. I eventually soothed Milo back to sleep and returned to the sofa with AJ. Once again, I found myself sobbing into her lap as she attempted to console me.
"I'll stay awake,"
AJ assured me.
"It's safe to sleep, Lucy. I promise."
Yet again, she offered the comforting embrace of the logical realm, and I wanted to believe her. After all, an actual man cannot simply be there 1 second and gone the next. There is no endless abyss. My loved ones have not perished. I imagined it. He is just a man. I need to stop giving my supernatural fears any credence. Those were the lies that I told myself. I did manage to close my eyes for a brief second. Perhaps longer than a second. Then I woke to the sound of a brief yelp. It was followed by the booming creaks of upstairs floorboards. I bounced from the sofa, startling AJ awake. She apologised for dozing off, but it was my fault. I had lowered my guard for a moment. Just a moment. That's all it takes. I bounded up the stairs, expecting to apprehend the man and block his only exit. I'm not sure why. I knew, beyond all of the empty, internal reassurances, that he was no physical thing. Nothing stoppable. When I reached Milo's room, his door was wide open, and the cot was empty. My baby was gone. I released an inhuman scream into the night, and I don't remember much after that. AJ called the police. I vaguely remember them coming to the house. When he first asked that question, had you already told him your child's name? The police officer queried.
"It was on Milo's beanie,"
I whispered absently.
"Right. Well, we looked up the name Finley Gaskell and didn't find anyone who matched your description," the officer explained. "And this bank account you mentioned doesn't exist."
He didn't exist. He wasn't a man. Not really. To have one's baby taken is a pain that I still, 2 years later, do not know how to put into words. It annihilates purpose. Without Milo, I was nothing. "Miss Woods?" the police officer pressed. I had not heard his question.
"I think Lucy needs some time alone. I'll take you up to the room,"
AJ said. I stayed in the lounge with several police officers and crime scene investigators. When AJ finally came downstairs, she embraced me. It was an excuse to bring her lips towards my ear and whisper something out of the law's earshot.
"There was a note on the floor," she said. "It reads, Milo, tunnel, alone."
My heart soared. He was alive. My baby was alive. "I don't want to be here," I told the room, standing and nodding at AJ. One of the police officers frowned.
"Miss Woods, I'll be staying with my friend,"
I interrupted. The officer was about to say something, but her colleague shook his head. "Lucy," AJ pleaded as we walked to her car.
"What are we going? Have you got your keys?"
I interrupted.
"Yes,"
AJ replied.
"But think about what the note said. Alone." "You know which tunnel he means, don't you?" I asked.
"Yeah," AJ said.
"But it's not safe, Lucy." "You need to wait for me in the woods," I said, tucking a hand into AJ's jeans and fishing out her car keys. "If something happens to me, save Milo. I beg you." Keys in her hands, AJ nodded, but her face was unrecognisable. She'd never shown fear before, never been timid in the face of anything, and she seemed more unsettled by me than the man. Nevertheless, my friend drove us to the familiar main road I'd found earlier that same night, and I pointed at a small patch of dirt alongside the edge of the woods. "Pull over here," I said. It's only a short walk." AJ complied, parking at the side of the road. We leapt from the vehicle and began our descent into the forest. I stormed ahead, trying to focus my phone's flashlight on the ground before me, so as not to catch any ghastly glimpses of the menacing man, who I assumed to be hiding somewhere between the trees. "Wait here," I said, 100 yards or so from the path. "Just hide. He won't know." AJ didn't say anything. She merely squeezed my hand in a futile attempt to keep me with her. It was no use, of course. This wasn't about her. It wasn't about me. I would scorch everything for Milo. I ran towards the tunnel entrance. The passageway was fully lit, but it was also empty. I wandered into its murky throat, waiting for the lights to extinguish. Instead, I heard something. Whistling. And then came what I had foreseen, the blackness. Reality faded away, and I found myself reliving that horrifying morning in the bank, the horrifying moment in Milo's room. The world collapsed on itself, revealing, beyond the cardboard set of our realm, only a void. Footsteps sounded behind me, but I twisted to find nobody there. "Milo!" I croaked. "Where is my baby?" "How much for Milo?" that same jaunty, charming voice whispered. "Please," I begged. All I wanted was my child. If it would have saved him, I would have eternally imprisoned myself in that lightless, soundless prison. Milo's fate was the true source of my terror, no matter what else the man did. And he knew that. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Boxes. People fit a mould," the man said. "But not all moulds are the same. What makes you different from others, I wonder?" A creak sounded, and I spun to see a white wooden door in the midst of the infinite void. I had no other option. I walked forwards, twisted the handle, and pushed it open. Behind the door was a white-walled room. Not more darkness, as I had expected. This was the end of the road, the culmination of the entity's torment. "Hello, Lucy," the man said. I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the two wooden chairs in the centre of the room. The two people sitting on them. "Patrick or AJ?" the man asked. My two loved ones weren't gagged. Not in a physical sense. Their lips were simply gone. I could hear muffled screams beyond the walls of flesh that covered what used to be their mouths. Their hands and feet were inexplicably rooted to the floor, much like the man had rooted himself to the ground in the forest. "You didn't come alone," the man growled. "Now, my price has doubled." "What price?" I meekly cried. "The price for your baby," he explained. "Where is Milo?" I asked again. "That is up to you," the stranger answered, before repeating his question. "Patrick or AJ?" I trailed off, trying to close my eyes and end this nightmare. They wouldn't close. He wouldn't let me close them. "What are you?" I wailed. "I am humanity's limits," he responded. "Just show me Milo. Is he safe?" "Will you pay the price?" "Yes! What do I have to do?" "That isn't the right question. How much for Milo?" "What?" I whimpered. The man smiled. His lopsided grin looked comfortable at long last, for it displayed his true nature. Malice. Pure malicious intent, with no rhyme, no reason. "How much for Milo?" the man repeated. "How much are you willing to lose for Milo? Patrick or AJ?" "What am I choosing?" "A heart," he explained, brandishing predatory teeth. My own heart thumped as dread encompassed me. "Whose beating centre will you devour?" the man softly inquired, as if he were simply asking for the time. Patrick and AJ, my muted loved ones, began to wrestle more urgently, elongated limbs wriggling as they desperately tried to escape their restraints. "Please," I begged. "Oh, you want the third option? I consume Milo's heart." I did not answer. The man was not offering a choice. All roads led to damnation. AJ cried, and my brother turned to her, before adopting an eerily calm disposition. Tears gushed from his eyes, but they had a resolute stillness. I knew the look. It was the one he gave when we were children, and he offered me his favourite toy animal. It was the one he gave when I begged him not to tell our parents that I'd sneaked out of the house at 3 a.m. It was the one he gave when Milo was born. It was a look that expressed he would do anything for me. Patrick nodded. I shook my head defiantly, but my brother continued to nod. "Do it. Your children need the two of you," he whispered. I hadn't understood anything else that the muffled pair had been saying, but I understood that. Heard the words as if they were spoken directly into my thoughts. Instinctively, I'd wanted to save my brother, but I looked at AJ's eyes. Thought of 12-year-old Johnny, her son, who I'd met a few weeks earlier. My brother continued to nod vigorously, and I looked at the man in the black trench coat, who grinned. I wasn't going to make someone an orphan. "Patrick," I sobbed. AJ's head lifted. She hadn't heard the silent conversation between my brother and me, and she was perplexed. "Are you sure?" the man asked. "Don't make me say it again," I cried. The haunting spectre smiled more broadly. "Patrick Woods," the man announced. "It is time to offer your heart for Milo." The man tore my brother's shirt, revealing his rapidly undulating chest. Patrick attempted to conceal his fear, for my sake, but he was frozen. AJ squeezed her eyes closed and unleashed a muffled screech. I wanted to do the same, but he wouldn't let me. "You must watch, quietly," the man said. Without warning, the vile entity plunged his fingers into my brother's skin. Patrick wailed. As if the man in the trench coat were harvesting a vegetable from soil, he rooted around in my brother's chest. Patrick's face twitched violently as blood oozed from the wound in relentless ribbons. "I can feel your fear," the man whispered to Patrick, finally latching onto his heart. I watched my brother's teary eyes start to roll backwards as his moans faded. Then the hellish creature wrenched the organ from his chest. I truly believe, for one moment, Patrick beheld his still beating heart in the entity's hand. Then my brother's eyes closed and his body lay still. AJ continued to bawl. I found myself in a state of detachment, only seeming to process the heart in the man's inhuman palm. The beating continued for an unnatural length of time, kept alive by some paranormal force, before stopping. Triumphantly, the entity severed the veins and arteries that were still tying the lifeless organ to my brother's desecrated carcass. "Eat." That was all the man had to say as he displayed Patrick's heart on an outstretched palm. He waited patiently as I quivered. My mind and soul were scrambling to the surface of my body, begging to be let free. However, they would not have wanted to experience what my body was about to endure. I took the organ from the creature's palm. As I held it in my right hand, I gripped the meaty substance a little too tightly, and blood flowed down my wrist. In a dazed state, I watched the damp pool that was starting to stain the sleeve of my jumper. "Take a bite," the man urged. Wrestling with the instinct to empty my guts, I thought of my baby boy. I thought of my brother. His death wouldn't be meaningless. If anyone else were to suffer, then it would all be for nothing. I had to survive for Milo. AJ had to survive for Johnny. So, disconnecting from the real world, I closed my tearful eyes and delicately placed the wet, squelching surface of Patrick's heart on my tongue, lightly grazing it with my teeth. I don't remember how long I hesitated, but I remember taking the plunge. The wet sound and texture sickened me. I still feel the blood and mush at the back of my throat. Nothing will ever wash it away. And I still feel the vomit that immediately filled my mouth. I aggressively gulped, swallowing the macabre mixture of stomach acid and gore. Not wanting to pause and prolong the unspeakable act, I hurriedly took another bite, vomiting once again and gulping once again. "Milo is so close," the man whispered as I sobbed. "Do you taste him?" As I took a third bite, my body began to groan, violently rejecting the atrocious act that I was committing. I ignored the agony as that blade slowly gutted my abdomen, because I knew it was nothing compared to the torture that my brother had just endured for my baby boy. "This is for Milo," I reminded myself, eyeing what remained of the heart in my hands. "One last bite," the man promised. "Good girl." Wobbling on my feet, eyesight obscured by tears, I eyed the last mouthful and quickly shoveled it into my open maw. After several awful munches, I swallowed. There was a moment of silence. I looked at my blood-stained hands to see that Patrick's heart was gone. My insides were ablaze, but for a short while, adrenaline made it easy to ignore that. The man offered his unsettling smile one last time, before everything faded away. When I woke, I found myself staring at the grey dashboard of AJ's car. Blackened scenery rushed past the window, and a small, familiar bundle danced in my lap. With eyes drowning in silent tears, I looked down. Milo. He was rolling around and giggling with eyes wide open. I tried to capture that moment in my mind, tried to focus on his glistening eyes. However, knowing that my baby was safe, the adrenaline disappeared. All I pictured was my brother's body. All I felt was an excruciating pain in my stomach. And there was the faint sound of laboured breathing beside me. I turned to my right, expecting to see some sinister spectacle that the man had orchestrated. It was AJ. I beamed brightly, but my smile quickly faded when I realised that she refused to meet my gaze. She did not speak. Her mouth had returned, and her limbs had been restored, but she simply stared at the road ahead. Her lip was unsteady, and she had a white-knuckled grip on the wheel before her. "AJ?" I whispered. No reply. When she finally dropped me off at my home, she uttered only 2 meagre words, and we never spoke again. "Thank you," she cried, before driving away. I didn't stay in that town. There was nothing left for me. A week later, Patrick's body was found in the woods, but the police investigation produced no murder suspects. I am still unable to look at my parents in the eyes, knowing what I've done. I showed my face briefly at my brother's funeral, of course, but that was the last time I saw them. AJ never replied to my texts, so I stopped contacting her. I understood her refusal to speak to me ever again, but it had to be done. There was no other way.